Okay, we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Coach's Corner on the Fitter, Faster Swim platform. I'm your host, as always, Mike Murray, and today we are thrilled to introduce you to Olympian Samantha Arsenault Livingstone. Welcome, Sam, to the Coach's Corner.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here with you. Thanks.
Me too. We've been talking about doing this for a long time, so I'm glad our schedules finally lined up and we were able to bring you in. Yeah. I want to remind our viewers today that we're not going to tolerate any spammers in the chat box. So if you're spamming our chat box, we will have you removed. And if you stay to the end of the webinar, one lucky winner will receive a free Fitter Faster mask and beach towel. Sam, we're going to go over your bio real quick because it's important for people to know your background. Sam represented the United States Olympic team in 2000 in Sydney, Australia, where she received a gold medal as a member of the winning U.S. team in the women's 4x200 meter freestyle relay. You teamed up with some famous names here, Diana Munns, Lindsay Benko, and Jenny Thompson. And you guys set a new Olympic record in the event final of 7:57.8, still a relevant fast time today. Sam is the founder of Livingstone High Performance LLC and the Rise Free Academy. She's a high performance coach, a self-proclaimed recovering perfectionist. I knew you'd appreciate if I put that in there. Public speaker, workshop facilitator, and has worked with the likes of USA Swimming, Harvard University, Williams College, the American Swim Coaches Association, College Swim Coaches Association, TEDx, and you've had your work featured on NBC's Today Show. As I said, we've been planning this show for a while, and I'm so excited to have you. We grew up relatively close. We both swam at all the same meets growing up in the Eastern Zone. So in a way, I got to watch a little of your career as a fellow athlete. And we have an awesome list of bullet points to go over today. But you have a really important life story, Sam, and I think it's great perspective for us to contextualize what you're talking about today if you're comfortable sharing your unique journey in the sport. So with that, I'd love to have some ideas from you or hear your particular journey in the sport of swimming. And I'm
getting settled in.
Yeah, and give us a little history on Samantha Arsenault Livingstone.
Yeah, so before we talked about you giving you permission to interject whenever, and if there's questions, I can pause and take them. So I started swimming up, on the North Shore of Boston. And I really only started because my older brother was swimming and I did not want to sit on a hot pool deck. So my first love was soccer. And I share that because I played soccer, which is not the normal swim story, right? All the way up until I was a sophomore in high school. So I was doing that. Soccer was my first love. And so I was doing that in the fall. And then when soccer season ended, coming into swimming in the YMCA program and then going back to soccer in the spring. And so as I was finding my way in swimming, I was, the times were just dropping. And I was at 12 years old at YMCA nationals, right? And soccer, I'm playing at a club level. But when it came time to make that decision at 15, the choice was clear, right? Which direction that I was going to go in. So 9 years old, I made my first team. Like I had to learn all 4 strokes. And I worked really hard to do that. And I always had this, looking up to the big kids, there was a cohort of older swimmers who would getting the lane lines. And after the YMCA's lesson program was done, and I would be watching them in that transition and just kind of going, I want to be part of that. And that was what drove me to move through the lesson program, make the team, and then ultimately inspired me to make Y Nationals because that's what they were doing too, right? Going to this meet in Fort Lauderdale. And so by the time that I was 12, 13, 13, so my second Y Nationals I made, just to give context for the swim coaches, made my first junior national cut in a swim off. So I tied for 16th in the 100 free, and I dropped like 4 seconds in a swim off. To make my first
little extra competitive motivation.
Oh, maybe, yeah. So it's funny looking back because at the time, and this is kind of part of the work that I do now, you lose perspective, right? I had no idea, and that joy and love of just getting up and racing, right? And then it opens up that ability. So 13, I made my junior national cuts, and then I went to juniors. But simultaneously, there was shifts happening at the YMCA, and I know now that the coaches that were coaching me, there was mergers happening across the North Shore. So our Y merged with other Ys, and then there was coaching shifts. And the YMCA of the North Shore now is what it's called, was basically pushed the coaches out that were my coaches. And so there was a decision, my parents, we tossed around all sorts of things like petty or bowls or what do we do? Where do we go? Marlins, like all these options. And we decided to go with these coaches. And that was tough because that was a really hard time. And I can get into I will go as far as we want to go and feel safe going in here. And sharing, because that was a very toxic, abusive coaching environment. Being pulled away from the YMCA and with coaches whose behavior at the time I just thought was a price you had to pay, in the sport. It was normalized across not just our team, but other teams. And that's when I hit a really low point in my life. And I say that, I was 14, body's changing, time starts slowing. My big brother goes off to college. And I failed to mention at the beginning of this, as that 9-year-old, I had a dream to become an Olympian. And I thought it was going to be in gymnastics. I thought it was going to be in soccer. And then it was like, okay, well, swimming's my thing. So now it's going to be swimming. And I had the chance of seeing Jenny Thompson swim at the pool in Dover. I had the chance of listening to Jill Johnson talk at a banquet, right? And then seeing Mia Hamm, who was a soccer player in person. So these were powerful female role models that fed that dream that I could do it, that I could be like them.
And in your own house, because, Chris and I are closer in age than you and I raced Chris, at every big meet. He was always in the A final. And so you had an older brother who was seminally involved in the sport as well, at a very high level.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he was with me at these meets, right, as we progressed, and then swam at college. And his college career, I can't even tell you how many records he broke and titles he won, and ended up coming to Olympic trials with me in 2000. Yeah. And he started at 12. So that's like that, because we're 4 years apart. And so that, who knows, right? That's one of those that's like, oh man, if we had the resources. So this 14, 15-year-old space, to give perspective, I was finishing my sophomore year in high school, and I just was withdrawing. So for parents that are listening, coaches that are listening, my behavior changed. I started getting kicked out of practice. I was withdrawing and spending more time in my room. And I was what I know now to be, I was depressed. I was battling depression, and I was battling the beginning of suicidal ideation already at 14, 15. And what was happening is the environment and the coaches and the way they would talk about our bodies. So the language, it was sexual harassment. I'll call it that. It was throwing in lane line reels. It was chucking kickboards. It was making, if the guys got beat by the girls, it was they'd have to put on a female bathing suit and swim with that, right? At that level. And so that I turned inward and didn't talk to anyone because I didn't have the tools to do so. I didn't know what to do with all of it. And so I was wrestling, because at 14, I watched Amanda Beard in the 96 games. She's the same age as me. And so the story I told myself was, it's too late. I'm too far. I'll never make it. And I was battling this inner storm. And so thankfully my mom noticed this behavior, the drastic behavior change. And she just said to me, do you even want to swim anymore? And I was like, no, I'm done. And she said, well, what if we change club teams? And she had no idea. She just knew something was up, but she didn't know what it was. And that I was like, yes, let's go. And that was when we made a unit decision, because I'm one of 4 kids. My dad works for a family business. My mom was currently at that time going back to school. So she was going back to school to be a nurse, doing a daycare during the day, raising 4 kids. Like, it was chaotic. And they made that decision so that I could train over an hour away from my house. So that was the beginning of complete shift in culture, focus on process. It was under the leadership of Don Lemieux in Gardner, Mass. And it was this old, we were just talking about this before the call, this old bathhouse, the oldest in Massachusetts. It was gritty, it was grimy, it was like you just get in there, the turn, you had to have great turns, because the low end was always low on water, and it was no more than 3 feet, right? So it's like it was 5 lanes, and it just, the people, the older the seniors and juniors, there was an Olympic trial qualifier in the pool, college scholarships. Like, it was just a total shift for me that breathed life into me and helped me feel closer to my dream, like it was possible again, and helped me feel whole, truthfully. And so I felt like we were one, that team feeling was really strong and powerful. And so then the community embraced me, the families. And so that from 15, I joined at junior national level. And by the end of my 15th, before my 16th birthday, I was already qualifying for senior nationals. I think I won juniors East at the time, the high point. I can't remember the exact timeline. Lemieux could tell you better. But by 16, the next summer, I was, swimming constellation finals. I won at nationals and made my Olympic trial cut. And
so
then
the year that you did that,
yeah,
and Don and I go way back and we're friends, and I called him to get a little history on Sam. The year that you made that first Olympic trial cut, there was a set in the summertime, and I don't know if you'll remember this, but you went 6 500s on 6 minutes and you held 451 the whole way. And in Don's mind, that's what unlocked this idea that you could get to that next level.
Yeah, there's sets of 500s. Did he tell you about the 3 500s when I mentally packed it in? Because that was, it ranges, it's the full range. Yeah, I think that he kept those nuggets to himself, but he showed up in a way where he believed that it was possible. And when I wavered in my belief, he held steady. And I think that was what was so incredibly powerful, was this space to dream and to believe. I mean, I think that that's what we do as coaches, right? We hold space. And yeah, so no, I don't remember that set. There's a lot of sets that I don't remember. However, but I do remember pushing out times in practice that were best times, or I would just be shocked at what my body was capable of actually doing when I was in that flow state. So
sure.
Yeah. So trials at Irvine, right? So is 1990, was it 98? Yeah, 98 Irvine Nationals, made my trials cuts. And then from that point, that's when I started to win 18 and under national championships, was second to Lindsay a few times at nationals, up on that podium, and almost, the 50, 100, 200, 400 freestyle were my main events at that time.
And are you enjoying the sport at this point, Sam? Are you really enjoying it? Is this the part of the process that, if you look back on it and say, wow, I was really at a spot where emotionally and mentally I was super comfortable and I enjoyed everything I was doing?
So no one's ever asked me that question, because at this point in my story, in my life, I would say that I was navigating being a transfer as a junior in high school. So that's tough. I say that. And also I came into a powerhouse of a swimming community, and the administration and the teachers, I only had one teacher that was unkind, and the rest of them were incredible. And school for me was so incredibly important. And so coming into that environment to a way smaller school. So I went from a massive high school to a very small school. So I felt safe. I felt welcomed. I felt part of this community almost instantly. And then the friendships, we went to school together, we swam together. And so there was that part too. So there was a balance of belonging. And so that, I think, was really powerful. And then to be working toward goals and to seeing, it's so hard, because to detach ourselves from, and we can get into the details of this, but we don't want our self-worth attached to our performance, because then when we're doing well, it's great, we're lovable, we're happy, all the things. And then when we're not, it also feels good to see results, right? So if we separate that and say, it just felt good to see time drop. It felt good to work for something and then see the times dropping. I think, so at that time, from 15, 16, 17, that was a really super healthy time for me, truthfully.
Sure. And then you're transitioning into college, and Olympic trials is coming around. And what was that like?
So that was tough. I graduated at 17, and before graduation, I went on my recruiting trips. And so at that point, I'm like finaling at nationals, and maybe a contender, I guess, but it's still a year and a half out from Olympic trials. And that's when Lemieux started to have conversations with me about, well, this is a really big transition. I signed for a full ride at Michigan. I was so incredibly excited. That team and that class, the people that were being recruited that same year as me, I felt such connection to them. I loved Jim and Steph and what they embodied at Michigan and the school itself. And so there's a dream, right? So it was like to even think of staying home for a year when I graduated third in my class and, took all these APs, like school was a huge part of my, just who I was in the world. And then to say, wait, hold on, just kidding, I'm not going to go. But that conversation started to come up. And then sitting down and sifting through that decision, we made the decision to stay home and train because I had 1 year between graduating and trials. And so I took classes at a community college and then trained full time. So my rising senior class went off to school and I was home still. And that was tough. So yeah, we can go into that. That was tough.
Let's talk about a couple things that I'm hearing there. So you have these AP classes, you graduated third in your class. You are performing on an incredibly elite level at a very young age. I'm seeing the perfectionist side of Samantha during all of this. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that this is like something I've been working really hard over the last 6 years because I said, you were joking, but it's real. It's a choice every day to put down the armor of perfection. And I think we can get into the weeds of it because I think it's important for coaches to understand there's a difference between perfectionism and also striving for excellence. And right. So I don't know if I can even answer your question exactly, right? Because it's still a blur to me as to when this slide from striving for striving for excellence slid into that space of liability, which is perfectionism. Does that make sense?
Yes.
There's one meet I can share. I mean, it might be this moment. I was up at Bowdoin. We were doing a December meet. I think it must have been because Ian Crocker and I won the high point at that meet. Like, I think I won 10 out of 11 events. I broke all these college records and I came home and laid it all out for my dad. I was very proud to show him all my t-shirts and medals that I got. And he picks up the second place medal and he's like, second place? Like, what's this? And I was devastated. He was just kidding. But right. Like that for me was like, okay, we had a hard childhood at our house. And for me, it was instantly ingrained, like, okay, to be perfect, to get dad's love, like all this, like to go deep there for a minute, I've got to be perfect. And if I'm perfect, if I can just get it all right, then, so I think there was a transition that happened in a shift in mindset that happened, with that. And then a trip to the Olympic Training Center, which also fed into this beast of perfection. So it was shifting during that time for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to recognize, right? When you look back and you're able to say, I didn't see this then, but what I know now, I'm recognizing some patterns of behavior that may have been getting just started at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that so I know now because I teach this, like this is perfectionism is there's a genetic tendency and then it's environmental. And in a sport, you could argue that we are drawn to sports where there's high levels of control, like swimming. You just put your hand this way, you get faster. There's just versus a team sport where there's a lot less control. Or if it's perpetuated in the sport. I mean, I don't know. Does it matter? The reality is that this is, for me, it became something that took over my life because the difference, so just to be clear, striving for excellence comes from a place of curiosity, comes from a place of wonder. And that was pure in me. And so we were also joking prior to this about hard work. Like and I'm laughing because my husband and I are running together through this quarantine. And he's just like if we do repeat 200 intervals running like all out, I get so excited as it goes and he's just dying. And he's like, this is not typical. And he works with athletes of all levels, right? And so there's something about hard work that just lights me up. And so that is not perfection.
Right.
Detail-oriented, structure-driven, that's not perfection. People often will clump them together and say, this is perfectionist. It's great to be a perfectionist. You're detail-oriented. You care. No, that's not. Perfectionism is a belief. So it's a way that we see the world that if I can just fill in the blank, if I can just get to the top of the podium, if I can just get all first places, if I can just get to this weight, if I can just coach my kids this way, then I'll be protected from pain. the emotional, the pain of, you know, my dad not loving me or what. I mean, it doesn't have to be that deep for everyone, but the pain of judgment is number one with kids, with our kids collectively, that others will judge me. And so we tell ourselves a story that if I can just get all this right, then I won't feel this pain. And no one will, you know, I'll be protected from judgment. And so it's important we distinguish between that, because you can have, you know, because perfectionism is highly correlated to mental illness. It comes right alongside the shame. And we know that that's toxic and dangerous. And that's where it eventually took me. Yeah.
And managing those expectations throughout the process, right? Because with each step inside of our process, we reach another level. And with each new level, there's a whole new set of expectations, whether they're real or whether we self-impose those things. And did you feel that in your process of development?
Meaning, so externally or internally or both?
I think both.
Yeah. So what happened internally is that I knew, like a year out, I knew I could make the Olympics. Like it was just not, I knew I could, period. That was just about enduring the year, putting in the work, getting it done. I trusted our plan and I just knew. And what I'm learning now about myself all these years later is that is a skill set that's been very strong for me to just stay in my lane, literally. I mean, that was something, you know, NCAA results came out that spring, that year I took off, and I was like, just don't even put them up. It does not matter to me. That's not fuel for me. I don't need to story tell. I don't care how fast so-and-so is going, because it's not long course, number one, and number two, I can't control it. And I'm going to put in my work here. So it was like that ability to just focus on what I could control and process. So internally, there was a shift that I knew that I could do it. And it was about getting it done. The detail, so the internal shift where it became challenging was if like we joked about the 500s, there was a test set of three 500s. And I don't know what the heck they were on. Maybe like 530. The rest interval was not that long and they were best average. And so if I was on, I would go very fast, like 450 or whatever for all three. If I was not having a good day, meaning I didn't feel right or I went slow or it was hard or I mentally wasn't in it, it was like all or nothing, done. And that was so frustrating for Lemieux. So that was an internal piece for me. This all or nothing mentality, which is a mega mind trap, was getting very strong. And that then transitioned into food. It just kind of it grew, this inner beast. And that will play out later in the story, right? When it comes to making the team. So the external pressures were that Lemieux was locked into what he needed to get done. And I think in some ways that blinded him to what was actually happening with me when it comes to not just the physical piece, but the emotional and mental component as well. And then the structures that is the United States Olympic Training Center and the people that work there that are doing all these analytical like measurements and how big are your feet. That's when I realized I have small feet for my height, right? It's like, but that's when I was pulled aside and they filmed my stroke and said, I just remember, at first of all, I remember completely cheating or just like making stuff up on the psychological assessment. Like I just was like, yeah, whatever, right? Like what's the right answer here, right? And that was the only component related to mental health, was that check-in. The conversation here is about mental health. That was it, that. And then they said to me, it was on the pool deck, pulled me out of water and said, okay, your stroke is 99.9% efficient. There's no changing it to get you faster. So what has to happen is you have to lose weight and maintain your strength from here till trials, or you have to get stronger and maintain your weight. And as a 17-year-old female, that was just like, or male, period. There was no, so what Lemieux and I have grown through some hard times. And as adults, right, I've gone back to him and I feel he would sit with me in this conversation to say that he did the best that he could with the tools that he had at the time, and a lack of knowledge in this gap was painful for me. And there are things he could have done if he had the tools that would have been very helpful. Because he went to work. He was like, thank you for this help. This is what I need to get her faster, and let's make a plan. And I went to the place of I'm fat and I need to not eat. And
so when you first heard that, because I think this is really important for coaches, athletes, and parents. Mm-hmm. When you heard that, there was nothing else that was going to get your brain off of the track that it had been set. Is that what I'm hearing?
Completely. So my, and I don't, blame is just taking my emotions and painful experiences and throwing them at people. I don't do that. I will fall into that and then hold myself accountable because I'm human. But I really try hard to be thoughtful about what happened there. And I think it was a severe just lack of structures in place to know how that sounds and to digest the information. It was just like, here's what has to happen. And where is the psychology of an athlete? Like, we know better than that, And so there was no discussing it. There was nothing that happened after that. It was just, this is what needs to happen. And so that is where, and I don't know if you were planning on this. We've talked about it, but the weight of gold and just the structures and all that. But like,
I was just going to segue there. So thank you.
I mean, this is just one example of a personal experience where it was like left out to dry. And not only that, if they hadn't said that, let's just say they hadn't even said that, but as a young athlete emerging onto the scene with who knows what potential, right, at the time, I'm brought into this place where I'm measured and I'm, they're doing all these things to me and there's no one talking to me about anything. So I'm just like starting to compare where I had that vision and I was like, get me out of here as fast as possible because no one's talking to me about when you're getting in with Jokums and he's got this kick set going on. I've never done in my whole entire life. And his team does it every single day. Like, I'm getting smoked. And so there's no, right. So how do I not compare? And where it was so head trippy. There was no thought put into, and I hope it's different. I don't know. There was no thought put into the emotional and mental needs of all athletes, not just female athletes, but all athletes. And so, yeah, that was hard. So that was an external shift for me, a turning point for sure. Absolutely.
So then we can turn and you are headed to trials.
Yeah. You want to talk about March 1st or US Open? Oh my gosh. I say that jokingly because those meets I swam so poorly. And so that would have been, yeah. But those were signs, my behavior at those meets, looking back, so today at current state, like if I am working with Lemieux in the role that I have now as high performance consultant, mental health educator, training him in mental health first aid, he would have been well aware that there were major red flags happening, that something was going on underneath because I wasn't nourishing myself properly. I was falling into this super heady space of inner critic taking over so bad that in the middle of the meet in nationals in March that year up in Seattle, we shut it down after my first race. Even though I was pacing world record pace without trying, it freaked me out. And then we shut it down and he was like, F it, we're going back up with our training in the middle of the meet. And if he had had the tools to spot some of these signs, I think it would have been a different experience for both of us. Yeah.
Right. And at the time, you had not been used to not having your friends around. You were taking this year off to prepare for Olympic trials. It's a really different space for a 17, 18-year-old with all of these things happening. All of your peers are at college having that experience, and you're trying to be one of the best athletes in the world. So how do we compartmentalize that, and how do we identify that these things are happening to us at that age? And as coaches, are we looking for signs and symptoms of maybe there's a problem here? And I think we're going to get into that more with the bullet points, but I do want you to finish just this story, right up to Olympic trials and making the team.
Yeah. So that coming off of March was wobbly because, here I am. There was, I can only imagine. And we've talked about the frustration level, but he had prepared me. That was the last taper before trials. And I vividly remember being in warm up. It was so easy. And this is something that not a lot of coaches understand is real. The fear of success is so real. And Dodd Wales, I don't know if you remember Dodd, but he called me out on that and just looked me straight in the eyes. And that was a massive turning point for me because I didn't even know that was a thing. So you say signs, symptoms, all that. The lack of language is really holding us back. And that language for athletes and coaches to have this communication of what's happening internally, that's absolutely affecting my performance. So we left that meet, and just we're grinding. Meanwhile, I haven't shared this yet, but the summer prior, I'd had an injury in my left shoulder at a Grand Prix meet. in Charlotte. And I didn't know what I did, but I dislocated my shoulder and then swam the next day. And that was one of those things that stayed with me. And so by March, it was flaring up to the point where there were times where Olympian was like, what are we going to do? Like, we either going to go through it or we're not going to do it. It was like, what do we do with this pain in the shoulder? So that was starting to kick up. And then we just trained and prepared. So going into trials, I was as ready. I felt as ready as there's nothing that was the best feeling. There's nothing else I could have done. I felt like I did everything that I needed to prepare. So yeah, you want to talk about trials and what happened?
Yes, because it is this incredible juxtaposition, right? Here you make an Olympic team. You are an Olympian forever. One of the few that ever get to say that title in part of your name. And at the same time, you fell a little bit short of your goals. Now, we can look from the outside in and say, what's the problem, Sam? You made the United States Olympic team. Mm-hmm. But for you, it was an incredibly challenging moment because you have to balance the joy, because there's real joy, and that defeat that you felt. And when I talked to Don, and I think he had told me the story a long time ago, before you and I were really speaking on a regular basis, preparing for this, you had probably the best pacing that he had ever seen from you. Your morning swim in the 200 free was easy, and you were ranked number 1 going into the semifinal, I think. And then you felt easy and did another fantastic swim, and you were really amped up. And I think at the 100 mark in the final of the 200 meter free, you were ahead by maybe half a body length. And people were getting real excited around Don, and he said, I'm watching her stroke count, and
first 25, you knew.
She overcycled.
Yeah.
And so you finish, and you don't get an individual spot, but you get a spot for the 800 free relay. Can you talk about what you felt that moment you touched the wall? Because you've made the team, but not necessarily in the way that you wanted to. And how did you handle it in the moment? And then how did that affect your choices from that meet forward to bring you where you are today and what you're doing today?
Yeah, so this is so interesting. When I hear you retelling it, I cannot help but think of the rising seniors and all of our kids of this is not what they thought this would be like. Like, they did not imagine that they'd be navigating a pandemic right now, not swimming, sometimes swimming, like that. It's an excruciatingly painful place that we go when we compare the current reality, and it's not what we wish that it was or what we thought it would be. That comparison, it just robs the joy right out of the moment. So there's a connection here with what's happening in our world in this moment for me. So yes, I did. I came out of prelims steady, semi-steady. I had so much left in the tank. We were training. The world record at the time, I think, was 157 from Francisca. And I easily could have beat that based on what I was producing in time practice. Not easily, but I was prepared to do that. And I was prepared to win. And I had no doubt that I was going to. And I didn't breathe the first 35 meters, and my stroke rate was way higher than I'd ever trained for it to be. And so the last 10 meters, I was breathing to my right. I don't remember which lane Rada was even in. I think I don't remember, but I knew with 10 meters left, I felt the dream like just being sucked from me because I could not move my body. And I tried to override it with the inner coach voice and couldn't. And so that was a moment of, again, this clashing of that belief that I thought that if I just tried hard enough that I could control the outcome. So that came up, right? If I can just try hard enough, then I can get what I want. And hitting the wall, I actually stumbled upon the photo of a news that was printed in a newspaper that someone had laminated for me a few years ago after, this is another part of my story, my daughter's open heart surgery over 6 years ago. And I had never seen that moment. And so that unleashed this whole, I don't know if I cried, but it was this wave of whoa and processing. And in that moment, at the time, versus what I know now, at the time, I was angry, so angry. I was numb. It was surreal. It didn't matter that I made the Olympic team, if I'm being honest, because I got third, and that meant I couldn't swim in at the Olympics. And so I jumped into the warm down pool, and I think I saw Ian, and I referenced him. We came up through New England swimming together, and we're very good friends. And his congratulations, and it was just like, yeah, like, okay, like, meh, whatever. And I floated in the warm down pool, and then Lemieux and I walked. No, we didn't say one word to each other the entire length of the hallway down to drug testing. And then when they presented me to the crowd, all of that, like, not one word was said, because he just knew there was nothing you could say. And that, it wasn't until, navigating open heart surgery with one of my daughters as a mother and all this healing later that I finally understood, oh my gosh, I didn't know that I could feel both. Because I was happy. I mean, it was a dream come true, and also so disappointing. And so for a long time, I hid that disappointment. I pretended like everything was okay and that I was so grateful, because I was grateful, but I hid all the dark parts, because it's like, who do you think you are? You just made the Olympic team. Like, what? You don't have nothing to complain about. Like, what's your problem? And so that was shame inducing. And so that's a silencer and isolator. And yeah, that was a really hard moment. I cried the whole plane ride home. Once I was finally out of, and then, this is another part of, for coaches to understand their role and in emotional resilience. Lemieux just talked, he was my resilience. So he was just coaching and coaching and coaching. And I hadn't built that muscle in myself. And so then what happens when you have kids that make national teams or go off to college, when you remove him and he's no longer there, and he's no longer in my ear at, training camp Pasadena or over in Australia, like, I was floundering because I didn't have that skill set in me to say, because his whole thing was, okay, cool. Not cool, but that sucked. And also, here's what we can control. You can be the fastest relay split. Get on that relay. Right.
That's what he told me. He said to me.
It was an immediate pivot to this. This is the plan. And that's so helpful, because it gives you a sense. I mean, that's what I teach. Control the controllables, right? I didn't know how to do that on my own. He was doing that for me. And that's not to say he was wrong, but it's something that you want to do. This gets into a whole nother topic, maybe. I believe that coaching is a co-collaboration. And I think that, I know I'm a disruptor when I say that, because I work with athletes and work with coaches, and it's this dynamic of power over, and you do what I say. And with that model, like, what happens is then we don't build the skills we need to. When you have power with, and you're a co-collaborator, it doesn't mean the athlete gets to disrespect you, right? It just means that they have a voice and that they've got to build the skills too. You can't be doing it for them. Same with parents. So yeah, so that was really hard, because on that plane ride home, I had clear direction. So that became my mission. But then when I was floundering in space without my coach, you go to the training camp with whoever coaches, that was tough. That was a tough transition.
And Sam, when you're going through those moments of fear and anxiety about a performance that you can no longer control,
rumination.
Inevitably, we have family, friends, teammates trying to step in and trying to grab onto some of that for you. How were you reacting to people who were trying to help you at the time? Were you open to it? Was it too deep a cut to kind of allow other people in there with you?
Mm-hmm. This is a powerful question. These are great, because I haven't been asked them before, and I like how they make me think. So what comes up for me when you ask that is the rescuing and the fixing that we want to do as fellow humans, parents, coaches, teammates. I think my teammates gave me space. I don't think people knew what to say. I think that I was also in my own world. So I was, there's a lot of protecting that happens. And like, once you make the team, so I was shielded from a lot. I learned things later. Right. So the part of me, it was like kind of a combination. It's like a part of me that hid, I just kept just downplaying, just shoving it down. The parts where I felt disappointed, and pretend like, I'm so happy. And, there's a moment celebrating at dinner, and I was mortified because my mom and dad were telling people, but I felt like I only made the relay. It's not really an Olympian. Like, if you make a relay, like, it doesn't really count, like all this stuff. It was all internal. So They were celebrating what I had accomplished, and that part. Yeah. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times in those moments, right, we shut down, and then I am the number one perpetrator of this as a dad, as a partner in life, as a coach. I want to fix.
Yeah.
Right. And so the last 2 years, really, I've learned to try to take a step back, because if you ask my family, they would say, Mike says, okay, well, let's find a solution. I want that problem solved. So how can we as coaches maybe take a step back from wanting to jump in and fix it and co-collaborate?
So that's the space of, so you want to move into that space of what you can control. What we're missing massively, collectively, culturally, not just, in all of sport, and I really feel like just our culture in general, is that space that you're talking about. So it's a mindful approach. It is moving from reaction into this responding. And part of growing that space is allowing for emotions to pass through us. And so we're so emotionally illiterate as a culture. We don't talk about our emotions. I've shared with you that I'm in awe and inspired by the amount of teenage boys swimming, young men that are grabbing hold of what I'm doing in the work with them. Because I say blankly, like, you're told that you're not supposed to feel, right? That's just for girls. And it's just BS, because it's a human experience. And so if you look at the work of Jill Bolte Taylor, who's a neuroanatomist, she talks about in her book, Stroke of Insight, she talks about emotions as energy in motion, this wave that passes through you. And when unobstructed, when we allow ourselves to feel the emotional wave and let it move through us without fighting it or trying to fix it or run from it, it takes, do you know how long? Have you read my posts about this?
No, tell me.
Yes. When you get hit with a wave of emotion, whether it's sadness, frustration, disappointment, if you allow yourself to actually feel the physical sensations, the energy in your body, how long would it take for it to get on the other side of the wave and go away?
2 weeks.
Yeah, so kids say similar things. 2 weeks, like a week, 3 days, 90 seconds.
90 seconds.
I'm not kidding.
So why have we not learned this?
So this is my thing, because I haven't written about it publicly. I've talked about it in webinars and interviews. And I did a podcast with the Mindful Sports Performance crew, who I got trained in their technique.
Sure.
Yeah, I call it the pain paradox. In sport, we just love physical pain. I include myself in that. Push through the pain, right? Feel it and move through it. Like, you just learn how to cope with it and use it and harness it. Comes to emotional pain, we're out. Like, we are out. And the reality is that we're so afraid of it. And when you learn about fear, anything that you turn away from grows bigger. So if you turn toward the physical sensations, they will, and you turn toward tools, you learn how to name and differentiate, then the emotional wave passes. Then you choose your response. But we react, and so that gap, there's no space to do that. So then the physical density of the human body changes. We hold the emotion. It physically manifests. And so we carry that with us and become, I know that I've fallen into this, shove it down, and then, like, my husband or my kids say one thing and it's like, boom, it's all out, right?
Yep.
It's like, or you have someone that's holding it together at practice, and all of a sudden you're just like, where'd that come from? And it has to go somewhere, right? That energy. And so if we can meet our athletes and ourselves with the space and grace to just name what we're feeling, it's not weak or bad or wrong. It just is. And you cannot control what emotional wave you get hit with. That's
right.
The thing.
I think that go ahead. I'm sorry.
You can control how you respond to it. So if you judge it or you get mad that you have it, that keeps you stuck versus just naming it and letting it, right? Name it. What are you feeling? Yeah.
So important. And I can't tell you the amount of times in my career where I'm going through something and I'm in the drive to practice and I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to do this 2.5 hour practice right now with everything that I'm feeling? And I think that this is a good segue for us to talk about your website and, mental health first aid, and talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with your website and with your program there.
So yeah, the pivot, right? So it's like, just to kind of fill in the gaps a bit, was, finishing, went to Michigan, ended up transferring, worked with an amazing mentor to help me heal, because what ended up in, depression, suicidal ideation, post-Olympic depression, eating disorder, all the things that I had to climb my way out of. Finished at UGA, healthier, stronger, honestly, and faster. And so I then transitioned into a career in education. I literally thought that's where I saw my path, just straight education. I love teaching. And then my husband took a job. He's in sports performance, and he's the director of sports performance at Williams College, which is closer to home, right, from Georgia to Massachusetts. And so then we had, one kid, twins later, like surprise, one of them had a heart condition. And so that was the cracking open for me that just led to this full circle, me being able to talk to you about this. So if you think of timeline, it was 13 years of shoving this down, standing on stages, working swim camps, teaching, coaching, all the things. And I coached. I coached for Swim Atlanta, where I would tell the story of, if you think of an iceberg and it's the tip of the surface, that's the story that we hear. Those are the stories you see on NBC. And what we don't tell is what's underneath, which is the struggle. And that experience of open heart surgery and nearly losing her, not just once, but 3 times. And then her really, really painful recovery. She's still a medically messy heart kid. And that experience forced me to go back and embrace this idea of, oh my gosh, this experience that we just had with her in the hospital was so incredibly brutal.
Can't imagine.
And also beautiful. The gratitude was pouring out of me for the people, the doctors. So that was this, we can do both. So that allowed me to heal the moment at trials and go, oh my gosh, that 18-year-old, she was feeling all those things. And the girl on the podium just 2 months later with a gold medal around her neck, but an inner critic that was telling her that you're not fit enough, you're not fast enough, you just messed that up, right? You didn't all that. You can have both. And so that launched me into this healing journey of shedding this perfectionist armor. And at first, I'll be honest, my question was, can you be great and be healthy?
Right.
My therapist was right there with me going, I don't know. And then we watched the ordeal after Rio, and we were both like, we don't know. Can you be great and be healthy? And so that led me on a mission to start studying psychology and start looking for people who were doing it and coaches who were modeling this and cultivating these environments. And yes, the answer is astoundingly clearly yes. We just have to put the structures in place and get the tools in the hands of the people that need them. And so that is what ultimately led me to found my company, because there are, it's a crisis. It's a worldwide crisis. I actually work with an international organization. And when I say it's mental health, especially for our adolescents, right? So the numbers, suicide is the second leading cause of death. And we have not only an ability to, but I feel like a responsibility to, in sport, use sport as a leverage, as a vehicle for social change, and to drive this, shift this culture of asking for help as weakness, and really help heal as a society and help our kids develop the tools, because they're totally capable. They just don't have the tools. And the same with coaches. And so that's how it started, by me sharing my story. And then I cannot tell you how many people saying, yes, me too. And then you have Michael sharing his story and Allison sharing her story. And it's just like the voices just continue to grow. And I also want to say that it's not just Olympians. I've heard from teammates of mine at YMCA who are raising kids struggling still. So I felt like I can't go back in time, but I can absolutely take all the skills that I've built, all the things that I've learned, and pay forward so that we can do better for this next generation. And one of those things you've mentioned, because I believe, I'll be a disruptor as long as I need to. I think every coach needs to be trained in mental health first aid. And it's just, you have to be trained in CPR, right? To be on deck. That's for the physical body. Why not for the mental part too? And it's, we say it's so brave of you to talk about your mental health. Like I'm longing for the day where it's not so brave. It doesn't take so much courage. It's just what we do. We talk about our mental health. So, I could go on. You probably want to pivot me.
No. I think that's really important. And I see with the alumni from our program, I'll get those calls, junior year in college, Mike, I'm not sure I want to keep doing this. And I said, well, that's a really mature decision. What led you to this point? Well, I don't know who I am without swimming. Mm-hmm. And that's a really scary space. So, we watched, you and I talked whimsically about Weight of Gold. And, you see some of the digression that happens after you've identified with a certain part of your personality for years. It's a lifetime of having this identity. And it doesn't matter whether you're, Michael or Allison or any of these people. It could be the kid who's been on a club team his whole life, swam 2 years in college, and now doesn't think they want to do it anymore, but can identify with who they actually are. What's their authenticity?
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of us, swimming is part of our authentic selves. And so, walking away from that is so hard.
Yeah. So when I was listening to Michael, and I can't speak for him or his story, this just lining up timelines, and we share a mentor. I mean, the man that saved my life, truthfully, Greg Harden at Michigan. I know that he's, Bob has shared that he's worked with him, and Michael's worked with him, and they talk about that openly. And I can tell you that when I heard him talking in The Weight of Gold, I hear Greg. And that question, who am I? Because that was exactly what he asked me when I came off of gold. And then the surgeon said, you have to be out of the water because your shoulder's trash. Like you need to be out of the water. And so that forced me into that space of who am I? Right. And that is why, it's like, as a coach, I think we can all understand this. You reverse engineer it. You say, okay, how'd I get here? Well, okay, you walk it out further, and you have kids that are retiring and walking away from sport, and they don't know how to transition. And there's this low. Well, okay, how do we go back in time? They don't know who they are. Their athlete, their identity is like, I am a swimmer instead of I am me and swimming something I do. So then you say, okay, well, what do we do about that? Let's walk it back, this is the work. We have got to help our kids build a foundation of self. And that's that's why I founded The Way, which is the whole athlete initiative. And that is this holistic view of how do we develop the whole human and athlete, right? By honoring who they are as a person and helping them become better people, to use Greg's words, will help them become better athletes. And he's worked, you see that, you even hear it. He worked with Tom Brady as well. You hear it when he talks too. There's a solid foundation of self that is essential. For me, I'm coming to your practice today. You're giving me feedback this afternoon because, whatever it is, you want me to go faster, work on my tempo or something. If my identity is wrapped up in my sport, then when I hear you giving me feedback, you're attacking me. You're not giving me feedback about where to put my hand position or how to kick my legs. So there's this entanglement that happens that makes it almost impossible for it not to go straight to shame. And so either I'm going to reject what you have to say, I'm going to fight back, I'm not going to listen, or I'm going to feel wounded inside. And so if we want to help our kids thrive, then establishing this foundation of self is going to open the door to human potential. Because I think there's some coaches out there that are afraid to still. They want to hammer with fear. They want to use shame. And it's so limiting. It doesn't work.
Right.
So, yeah.
That we're finding, and you probably hear this a lot, we're finding that making those initial connections with our athletes, even inside of the last 5 years, I'm noticing communicating with these young athletes has changed so much because so much of their daily life is spent communicating electronically. And I really believe and now with the pandemic, there's going to be even less interaction. And we don't know what the fall is going to look like, but I'm assuming that there will be less interaction than they would normally have. What kind of strategies, Sam, can we use to bridge that gap where we're seeing a lot more introverted kids? How do we make those connections when it seems so hard to even just find a little step inside the door of that person or who that person is? Yeah,
so this is, I think the first thing that comes up for me when you ask that question is listening non-judgmentally. So, and that's empathy. If we want to use, name what it is. So being able to listen without judgment. But, then I back up and say, okay, are they going to talk? Because I do through The Way, through this offering that I have, I am able to work with teams. I'm able to work with individuals, and it takes time for them to open up. So I think as coaches, it's about continuing to show up reliably. It's continuing in reliability and accountability. All of that is part of the anatomy of trust. So it's like a little deposit here. I said what I'm going to say. I'm listening non-judgmentally. I'm here for you. I'm continuing to show up for you to create that environment where that trust jar, right? Those marbles get deposited and it grows. And then they're able to feel that that trust is high, and they're able to share. So that's, from just thinking in terms of structures, right? Like operating, how do you want to show up as a coach? And then I think it's about taking the time to, putting fear down. That this is so hard right now because water time's so limited, but putting fear down to say, it's okay for me as a coach to take the time, the 5 minutes, the 10 minutes away from water and actually show up for my kids and have conversations. And, if we're going current date, pandemic, maybe it's, through the computer, maybe it's through Zoom, maybe it's through what I'm doing with a couple teams, which is a team room, a virtual team room space where you're getting on Zoom and you're digging in and doing the work together so that they have the skill set to communicate. They have the language to be able to communicate to you. So does that answer your question? I lost your video, which makes me
Oh, I'm still here.
Okay.
I'm still here.
Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think, part of the thing that we're doing as coaches is we're constantly trying to find those ways to connect with the athletes and build those deposits of trust, like you said. And it's an incredibly challenging thing. And as we go through the pandemic, we're all trying to figure out ways to connect and stay connected. But
yes. Can I interject? So you just made me think of Jack, right? So what made his situation a few years so hard? And if you don't know, we don't need to get into the details. What made that situation so hard was that every day before practice, we would huddle up and he wouldn't talk one thing about swimming. Not one thing. Every day. Every day it was how's school, how's class, what's going on. Shout out to this person for doing this in school. Shout out for this person over here for this award, this volunteer service. It was always about how are you? Who are you? You're like, I see you as a human functioning in the world. I honor you. And then we shifted to swimming. So it was just it was that powwow before practice, but I care about you and I'm honoring you and as humans. And there was a celebration of that. And so I think when you said, these small moments, it can be just that. And that honestly, it is a big ask if that's something, as coaches, we're humans. So we're not going to get it perfect all the time. There's that, right? Like there's that humility. And the fear of that fear can come on strong of like, I'm not sure the right thing to do with to drop the perfect, just try some stuff.
Sure.
And grow as a human and maybe even say to the team, I'm working on this, for me, like I'm trying to grow in this way or, sharing that part of yourself that's growing and honoring whatever the values are of your team and connecting with them in that way. Vulnerability is powerful. It is so powerful. And to do it means you got to have courage and language, right? So.
Absolutely. No, I think that answers it great. And, I've been able to share some times with Jack on deck and you're absolutely right. He, in the small snapshots that I see with him, he does a great job connecting with the athletes that way. Somebody who I think does a phenomenal job of that is a Jack Roach, Matt Kredich. They have unbelievable connections with their athletes that create these spaces where there's a level of comfortability where people aren't afraid to make mistakes. And I think inside of that environment, you're going to reach high levels of success.
So that is something, have you read Culture Code?
Yes.
Yeah, right? That's part of it. Safety. What happens? That's a question that you can use as a reflection tool. What happens when people make mistakes? What happens when people fall short? What happens when you have an explosive reaction? Like, how is it handled? What does the response to that look like? And is it resilience building or is it shame driving? I think that's and if you don't know, then that's where you onboard help as coaches to say, I want to grow. I want to grow my language. I want to grow my tools. I want to grow my skill set so that I can then bring this to my team. And I say that understanding too, that there's so much on your plate, right?
I'm so glad you said that, Sam, because it brings me to a really important point.
Mm-hmm.
I, like many of my colleagues, care deeply about our athletes. Mm-hmm. I also know that I'm a swim coach and I'm not a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So in those moments where we want to fix, right, we have to learn, I think, to pare it back a little bit and develop strategies to have those conversations with our athletes. Look, I'm seeing something here. I don't think I'm the right person to help you with this. Here's something that we can do, and I'll be part of it if you want me to. Here's something that we can do together. Let's walk together in this direction.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how we can have those conversations with our athletes?
Oh my goodness, yes. So I'm so glad that you said that. And I, just a segue, I've debated often, like, do I go back? Do I get my PhD? Do I do this whole, and that's a side note, but to say that I haven't, because I believe so strongly in being a bridge, which is what coaches, I feel like that's what I want to help coaches do, is become a bridge, because you're hitting on something that happens all the time. The response back to that all or nothing mind trap is either, I'm not going there. I'm not opening that. I've had coaches say, like, I'm not even touching that, especially when it comes to like female fitness levels and body weight and all that stuff. Not going there. And then the other extreme is exactly that, becoming the therapist. And as someone that is not a licensed mental health professional, I can still help equip kids. This is what I do, right? So this pillar of support is helping kids, the athletes, the coaches, just putting structures in place. There's so much that we can do. And so being a non-judgmental listener, understanding when and where you can send your athletes to, and then building those relationships to know, okay, there's some warning signs here. I know what these warning signs are now. So that what you're describing is why I teach mental health first aid. So that is why I believe that I truly believe, and I'm not a paid spokesperson for them, I really believe that this is a missing puzzle piece in athletics, because not only is it shown that if you take it as a coach, you're going to have increased confidence with knowing how to navigate these situations. You're going to know what the signs and symptoms are of major mental illnesses. You're going to know where the resources are, where you go to send kids, because it's like one thing to notice, another thing to talk to them, and another to go, okay, well, I don't even know where to send you. And so all of these things, this is what you do in this curriculum, this training. You learn how to navigate this, assess for crisis, because, often it's the kids that are putting on the shields in the front. Like there's, it's nuanced sometimes to notice when there's, a possible mental illness or mental health challenge. And the thing is, you don't have to diagnose to become a helper and a noticer. And in fact, it's not a coach's job. It's not my job. It's our job to bridge to helps and supports. So I think that's how we do it. We take this training, and there may be others out there. I'm not familiar with them, but this one I stand strong behind because it's so relevant and it's hands-on. And there's just, you walk away. I walked away. I took it first just because I work with youth and adolescents, and I'm going, oh my gosh, this is it. Like, this is what I was actually going to try to create for the coaching community, because so many coaches say to me when I go do things, like, I want to help. I just don't know what to say. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I worked with the College Swim Coaches Association, and we did a whole newsletter series where we talked about this. And then, unfortunately, because of COVID, we had to cancel. But Greg and the team at College Swim Coaches Association, we were ready. We had a list of coaches ready to go and signed up to be trained. So it's now virtual, which is really exciting. So yes, thanks for letting me share that. But that it's both, like that, whether it's with me as an instructor or you find one near you, I just cannot say enough about it, because it's an investment that's going to give you this. I mean, it's like, here's what you need when it comes to supporting your kids with mental health issues.
It sounds to me like it's going to be something that we could include in our coach certifications for USA Swimming. It's just going to better impact our coaching community and equip us with some tools, right? We're always looking for tools.
Totally. And I am with you there. I am charging forward with you there. I've sent that message. Like, it has to be received. So this is, again, where Weight of Gold and the light it shines on structural obstacles is real. I will say that in talks with ASCA, they are listening, and it's way too soon to say, but they're listening. College swim coaches, they're listening, right? So there are organizations, LSCs are perking up and saying, okay, how can we help? So yes, I think that it needs to be tied to something. And also, even if it's not, as a coach, I think that parents get round and get loud and start demanding that their coaches be trained in this, because you're on the front lines. Sometimes you see the kids more than the parents, Right.
Especially during this time, we are spending a lot of time. Fortunately, we are back training. I don't know how long it's going to last. The pandemic is so fluid. But we're spending a lot of time with our athletes, responsibly socially distant, but we're probably, because of parents' work schedules and everything else, we're around the kids more a lot of times in their own families. So to be able to have this as part of our toolbox is, I think, critically important. One thing, Sam, that I wanted to talk to you about today, and that you have a really unique situation in your family where both you and your husband are coaches. And as coaches, our well-being and our mental health is so tied strongly to the support that we get at home. So what are some of the things that you and Rob do to manage the scheduling, being mom and dad first, and then all the other jobs that go along with it? Because us, we're on the road every weekend, basically the whole year, and we're gone first thing in the morning, and we're back at 9 o'clock at night. It's
hard. It's so hard. Yes. And so that's, if you were to ask me, what can coaches do? If there's one thing, it would be, taking care of yourself, putting boundaries up. And it's so much easier to say than it is to sift through it, right? To put the boundary up and then to deal with all the things that we have to sift and sort through and the feedback that we get from parents and kids, like all of it, right? It's a lot. So making sure that there are measures that you're proactively putting in place to fill. I mean, there's a reason it's so cliche, and it's also actually a demand when you get on an airline, right? Put your mask on first. So it's like this thing we talk about, fill your cup first, but if you want to go there, it's a matter of life and death. It's a matter of honoring your own self so that you can give to others, because it can only last and sustain so long, right? When you're pouring from the space of emptiness, of not refilling and recharging. And that might look different at different different phases, like cutting back on sleep or just trying to do all the things and saying yes and loading up your schedule and not working out and not moving toward tools. That might come out in your inability to take the space we talked about between reaction and responding. It might change in a lack of joy. It might pop out in relationships and a deterioration in relationships that you have. So I think that boundary setting is incredibly challenging. And when I say boundary setting, it's like what's okay, what's not okay. Getting clear about what your family values are. I think that's something that we actually have a poster in our house of what our values are. And then doing reality checks where we ask ourselves, are our actions aligned with what we say matters most? And so if we say that growth and courage and authenticity matter most, like, are we being authentic to ourselves? Am I out here talking about wellness and mental health and then just tanking my own? And so we give ourselves those spaces for reflection. But if you're asking for day to day, we both have therapists. I work with coaches. I have mentors. I have an inner circle of support when it comes to my business. And I meditate, I exercise, I nourish, I hydrate, right? So I have what I call my daily vitals. And that is something those are non-negotiables. And so, an example is you sent a text to me and I didn't have it because I wasn't, I didn't have my phone because I was meditating. And I think often in coaching, I felt this too. It's like, and as a teacher, when I was teaching for 6 years, it's like I have to respond to everything all the time right away.
That's my life right there.
Yeah. And you walk it back and you say, and I tell my clients, I work privately with clients as well. And I say to them up front, the boundary is I will respond when I can. You will hear back from me within 24 to 48 hours. And then I honor that, because if I'm asking them to do this work and I'm not doing it, right, there's this disconnect and I'm not living in alignment. And so to do that, right, so it's not possible. Okay. I challenge that. And I challenge you to walk down. So there's a technique of walking down fear, right? Because that's scarcity. I have to do it. I have to, right? What will fall away, right? What is, so often as coaches, my husband too, both of us have to really work at this. Productivity is linked to our self-worth. So we have to continuously put it down. Like if I don't get all my to-dos done, I'm still worthy of love. Like I'm going to be okay, right? I'm worthy. That's the foundation of self. So often we hinge it to like how productive we are, right? If I'm not that productive, then I'm not that good at my job or whatever. So That's a side tangent, but that's real for so many coaches that I work with. So it's a matter of making sure that you are setting the boundary. And if you're not, ask yourself why. And then if you are, I can't, right? Because that's a red flag word. Anytime we say we can't or I'll never, right? Walk it down and say, why can't I? I can't because, and then because, right? Until you get to the belief of what's going to happen. My team will implode, or I'll have no money for my family, or what is actually the fear, the core belief that's fear-based, that's driving that behavior. So now we're getting into my consulting, like we're getting into the weeds of this. So really the work that I do when it comes to the consulting is helping all of us humans understand the connection between our inner world and how we behave and how we show up. So yeah, so when it comes to coaches not honoring their self, their own self, and this, my husband and I have to work at it. It takes effort. When you say you don't have time or you say you have too much to do, challenge that, lean in and ask yourself why, and really get down to the underneath part of, is it that you don't value yourself? Like what is going on internally that's driving this behavior? Because at the end of the day, that behavior is going to lead you on a path where you're going to end up burnt out, or with, relationships that are burnt out, or just showing up in a way that doesn't feel good. So when are you recharging? Yeah. How are you recharging? Who's around you supporting you? Those are all like the mental health and wellness of coaches is critical conversation. Yes.
I think it's the foundation of the success of your team, right?
Totally.
What you're projecting every day is what they're getting.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm always trying to be mindful of that when I'm on my way to the pool. You said something in your response that I've heard you say before a couple months ago, actually. And you and I have talked peripherally about it, but you said walk towards your fears.
Yeah.
And let's talk specifically about the process of doing that, because I don't think I do it enough. And then I get into situations where I think to myself, I'm letting this fear take over every single thought I have right now.
Yeah. So there's lots of layers. So we can just, depending on where you want to go with this. So when you say, yeah, so just using imagery, right? I like to use imagery. I use visualization lots as an athlete, and I still do. We have, in when I say internal world, you have your thoughts and your emotions, right? And you have a set of core beliefs, and they are all interacting, right? So the thoughts that are coming through your mind, the emotions, the physical sensations in your body, that's all happening, right? We have between 20,000 and 70,000 thoughts a day that come through our mind. So many of us go through life on autopilot that we have no idea. It's like kind of when you're driving and you get to practice and you have no idea how you even got there. Don't remember it, because it's just, you go into this automatic space and the thoughts, right? One thought leads to another, and then you end up all the way, like way over here before you even know it. And that bringing awareness to the internal world of what physical sensations, what's going on, what is like pausing, just stopping, checking in with your body. Are you clenching your jaw? Are you up here? Are you, your shoulders up here? Are you like, where's your mind? Right. So right. Pausing, stopping and tuning in and bringing this mindful awareness to where are my thoughts and what are the physical sensations that are happening, right? That's the first step. And so often what you're saying, I think it's kind of a joke, but not a joke. It's real right now. This is like a wild human experiment in our country of what happens when fear, right? The feeling is in the driver's seat of our lives. It drives wild behavior. Quick scroll through social and you can see the result of that. When we're in fight or flight, right? That there's a fear response happening, and that I hope coaches are familiar. And if they're not, that's okay. It's helpful for performance to understand that arousal response. But when fear is driving, it shuts down our ability to be logical, right? It narrows our perspective and we respond reflexively. So that's where, when I say it's in the driver's seat, it's literally driving our behavior. And so to move to a space where you're able to walk it down, it starts by stopping and pausing to say, what am I actually feeling? What are the thoughts that are running through my mind? And then you lean in without judgment, but curiosity to say, oh, you know, depending on what the scenario is and how you're behaving, but ultimately, is the behavior not okay? Like, is there something about behavior that I want to change? I'm almost tempted to get my whiteboard out and turn my computer. But, just to go coach speak for a minute, you look at results. You have a specific result you set, right? You want to get somewhere. That's the outcome. Then you back it up and you say process. Okay, what are the steps that we have to take to get there, right? That's where we stop the conversation.
Right.
And that's where I say, no, we cannot stop there. We have to go under the surface because our inner world is driving our behavior. And if we don't own it, it owns us. So if you're feeling fear and you're reacting out of fear, you're living your life out of fear, your behavior is driven by fear. I mean, it just is. Until you stop, turn toward it, and then walk it down and name it. So what's going on? What is it that you're experiencing? What is the story that you're telling yourself? What are you actually afraid of? And I think that if we go straight to the depths, like this is a slow process and a really slow walk with teams and individuals. But at the end of the day, it almost always boils down to, I am not enough. I'm not enough. And we just want to know that we're enough as humans. We want to know that we're heard and that we're seen. And that's like a fundamental human across cultures, across the nations, all of it. Like that is our longing as humans. So it's usually related to that. So, I mean, is that answer? I could teach this all day. This is the work. This is the work. We don't stop at behavior because as a coach, you want to change behavior, right? You try all these things to change behavior. If you aren't going underneath the surface, you're going to end up in the same spot.
That brings up a Sam Arsenault Livingstone quote that I wrote down a while ago that's been really impactful for me in the way that I approach working with my athletes when they might hit some of these roadblocks. And that quote is, struggle is universal. Mm-hmm. Suffering doesn't have to be. Yes. Can we talk 100%. About that a little bit?
Oh, totally. So this was another thing in Weight of Gold, right? It's just like screaming. It doesn't matter. I share it in my TEDx. It's like, it doesn't matter what level of success you achieve financially, promotion-wise, the title you carry, like none of that matters. At the end of the day, you are human. And Michael's like, that was the work of Greg, right? That was those 2 years at Michigan of me meeting with him every week. And ultimately to come to the conclusion that I am human and no gold medal is going to change that. That there's no, and what I mean by saying that is we cannot achieve our way out of feeling pain and painful emotions. So then we say, oh, we're going to feel pain. But when we resist it, that's how we get to suffering. So I have actually an exercise that I was, as part of a training I took part in that I use. I can't give it away, but I should maybe figure out a way to how to share this. And it illustrates so clearly the resistance and how that ups our suffering. So you could play with this in many ways. The pain that's experienced, right? When muscles get sore, that's a physical sensation that's happening. My arms are feeling this way. But immediately we jump to the space of, oh my gosh, or what it means, or I'm getting sore too early. Or like we go to this resistance, we go to this place of resisting what is because we don't like it or we're judging it. And that increases suffering instantly. And so that, using the physical body as an example, it's like getting curious about the pain and reframing how you think about it, right? Can be so transformative. It alleviates that suffering. And I use that and I share that quote because there's no way to get out of, there's no easy button. There's no jumping over the feelings of judgment and shame and pain and all the human emotions disappointment, embarrassment. And so we do our kids a massive disservice when we go in and fix it and try to rescue them from their emotions instead of teaching them how to feel. Like I've shared with you before in an exercise, I have a PDF that we can share when I'm angry, these are my tools. So it's okay to be angry. It's human to be angry. Here are my tools so that my anger isn't getting in the driver's seat and I'm now throwing kickboards at someone or telling you to F off as a coach or to slamming my door at you when I'm at home, when, you and your parents. So it's that's the missing piece. Yeah.
Right. I think, you talked about this earlier, and this pandemic is adding another layer of anxiety to existing anxieties. And even people who maybe you thought would never act a certain way are acting differently because of this new level of anxiety. Everybody wants answers now. Everybody wants to know when we're going back to school. So we're dealing with so much uncertainty.
Yes.
And uncertainty is a pathway for all of these other things to start adding up. So when we start to feel that uncertainty come on, what are some of the strategies that maybe you and Rob are using at home with your kids? Our kids are almost the same age. We're trying to walk through some of those same fears, anxieties that come along with all the parent requests that I'm getting and all of the parent questions about, when are we getting back to some kind of normalcy? How are you guys handling that in your house? And what are you learning about this?
Yeah, I'm smiling because this is the definition. Like, this is what it drives anxiety, not knowing. It's the not knowing. I mean, that is what drives anxiety. And so I think I'll answer your question, I promise, because we do a lot of things. And I think that's really, it's so helpful to talk about what we do because it gives us agency, right? But this idea that we can actually control, like, we've never really had certainty. We've had the illusion of it. And I think that when I was bedside with my daughter, so almost 7 years ago, it was 7 years ago, she got the diagnosis. She's now 7.5. And that's when that cracked for me, that we actually don't have as much control as we think we do. And so it can send you to this space of, well, who gives a F? Why bother? Right? Like, or it can send you into hyper mode of, I gotta, like, this is super hyper vigilant space of, I gotta control all the things, right? And so we react, right? We go to that space of when you're wrestling with uncertainty and the not knowing, and the answer for us, and I believe for the human brain, is by practicing mindfulness, because the present moment is literally all we have. And I know that's cliche. That's so, when I first was doing this work with Greg, I'm like, what? He had me read The New Earth from Eckhart Tolle. And I'm going, like, what is this flower? Like, what am I doing here? The reality is, so using an analogy, if we have time, so you can feel free to speed me up. But the mindful sports performance enhancement crew that I got trained in to become an instructor of. So this is I infuse this as a practice. And I encourage coaches to look into it because they're so inclusive, or reach out with questions. They introduced the rubber band analogy. And so the rubber band is present moment, right? We stretch with intention into the future because we want to make goals for the season, and we got to map out our plans, and we want to make right? We do this with intention. And then we go back and we learn from our mistakes, and I have like a series of post-performance questions. We're very intentional with our reflection because it helps us grow. What happens with the human mind is we have some stimulus, something happens, right? Or our mind just goes there. Something makes us think of it, and we get snapped into the future, and we start what ifing, and we want to know. And that we have zero control over. It's an absolute waste of energy, and it pulls us from the present moment, which is actually where our power is, where we have that sense of agency. So what's helping us here is by strengthening that mindfulness muscle. So what that looks like is pausing, naming what's happening, right? Breathing is critical, because when you're in future looping, that is anxiety. Like, that drives anxiety. When you're in past looping, that drives depression, these depressive lows. So if you're able to notice when you're there, and then you have tools to come back to the present moment, you're able to thrive. I mean, it's still hard, but this is where we can channel our gratitude. This is where we can take control over what we can control. We can't do anything out there, right? When it comes to this looping. So breathing and breath work when it comes to anxiety, because anxiousness and anxiety is triggering that fight or flight response. And so breathing, diaphragmatic breathing in particular, right? Really engaging the diaphragm and the belly instead of the chest up here, and shoulder breathing. It activates and stimulates the vagus nerve, which, to get a little sciencey,
this is good.
It activates the sympathetic nervous system. So, the parasympathetic nervous system. So when you're in fight or flight, so the brain does not know the difference between a real threat of your, to your life, or this idea that you might not be able to swim in college, or it might not look like what you want it to look like, or you're unsure that you're going to be able to go as fast, or your parents are, you don't know if your parents can have money to pay bills. That threat activates that sympathetic response. And so you're heightened. And that's where, when you were saying fear gets in the driver's seat, fear is literally, when we're feeling that anxiety, it is in the driver's seat, driving our behavior. So when we notice, when I'm anxious, my face gets hot, my stomach gets tight, and I start snapping at my kids, and everything irritates me, right? Those are my flags. So that's awareness. This is how it shows up for me. Maybe you grit your teeth. Maybe everything just is stupid, right? Or, this is never going to work out, right? Your mind just goes to that space where it's catastrophizing everything, right? What are your signs that you as a human are in this anxious state? So you notice, and then you activate your breathing. We do finger breathing. We do box breathing. We have literal toolboxes that our girls have built. We have named it as a family. I have charts. I was going to grab it's hanging out in our, I take cards like this, and I have 3 rings, and there's tools on them for the kids. And it's so essential because it's not just for them, it's for us. So they'll say, Mom, you're throwing your anger at me. What do you need to do? Like, you're right. I did. That's not okay. It's okay for me to be angry. It's not okay for me to start snipping at you. Like you didn't, right? That's on me to regulate my own emotions. So we notice. I think we have to start paying attention to when we're in this space. And then instead of meeting ourselves with judgment that we're there, we go, again, I'm human. This is part of struggle. It's okay to have anxiety. What do I want to do about it? What are my choices? And so something as simple as this, and if people are still watching, I can send this as well as your little mask and towel, this next best step. I sent them to you, actually.
Yep.
You flip it over and it's like, what's my next best step? What are my choices?
Right.
So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
It absolutely does. And I gave one of those bracelets to my 6-year-old or my 7-year-old daughter. And I said, Claire, when you're having a bad day, you just flip that up and you remember that you just got to keep moving.
Yeah. What's your next best step? And the next best step might be just, I've done this. I think I've shared it with everybody now. I've literally during this pandemic opened the front door and I've run around my house. And then there was one time that it was pouring rain and I was running around the house and it was so muddy and ended up all my girls thought it was hysterical. So they started running with me and were like laying in mud puddles by the end. But that could have easily turned into me showing up in a way that I would have felt awful about, to be honest, because this is a lot. Like acknowledging how hard this is. Like there's no doing it perfect. There's no one out there that's going to manage it all perfectly and not feel anxiety and fear. It's just, that's not reality. So it becomes, how do we want to respond to ourselves?
Absolutely. And for us right now, and Jeremy, Lynn and I are going to talk about this tomorrow, with our 10th, 11th, and 12th graders and our athletes who are going on to college next year. Some of them are going into college knowing that, okay, my whole first year of swimming is going to be gone. And the 10th and 11th graders are saying, college coaches aren't really calling me right now. I can't update any coaches with my ACT scores. I can't update with any new SAT scores. So, so I think it's important for us as coaches to say, I have no idea what you must be feeling like, because this is so new. We've never experienced anything like this. And so operating inside of that space has been a challenge. What are your recommendations for parents, to talk with their children, or coaches dealing with their student athletes about, their college search and the matriculation process? Because that's something that you look forward to, right? Your whole swimming career, some of it might be wrapped up in, I want to swim in college.
It's so hard right now. I have rising juniors too. One of them actually swims, the other doesn't. And this is the space. Like this is what they were looking forward to. They've worked so hard in school, right? All the AP classes and all the stuff. And it's like, I think what we have to do is what we've talked about throughout, right? This theme. Be willing to hold space for the hard without going in and fixing it or dismissing it or saying, yeah, but listen, like at least it's not this bad, or right. Just allowing space for what is grief. Truly, it's grief. It's a loss. This is not what they imagine. This is a loss. This is like they've had a lot of loss. And so holding space and stepping in with empathy and compassion is so critical. And it is like, I don't know if it's just hardwired in me as a mom, as a parent, right? You have this mama bear, like parent reaction to just sweep in, and coaches too, and make it better. And we have to fight that. We have to actively work to sit and show up and hold space so they can feel what they're feeling and get it out. What is going on? Don't make assumptions. Don't storytell. Let them tell you, how are they doing? Because sometimes you might have it be the case where the parent's projecting onto the kid, and they're the ones that are more upset, or the coach is so much more upset. But this is, I look at my 4-year-old helps me understand this. Like this is her normal. This is world. This is life. Now she's not a rising junior or senior who's thought about and watched other kids go off to school. So that's not fair comparison. But the idea that the idea that we may be putting our own narrative onto them. So give them space to talk, give them space to process without judgment, without a word, just listening. And then you say, I'm here to help. When you're ready, let's sift into the space of what we can control, what we can't control. And then I think you first get clear about what it is that they want to experience and why, what matters to them. And then you try to navigate and figure out what the next best steps are from there. But the first step has to be holding space to get them to be able to communicate, to talk, to process what they're feeling. Then you maybe need to identify, maybe they need a therapist or a coach to talk to. Maybe they're doing better than you think they are, right? So you're assessing, and then you help them and you say, I'm here, I'm ready to do this with you. What is it that you're looking for? And then we go, what can we control? And unfortunately, they can't control the pandemic. It's just the response to it. So there's going to be lots of hard emotions to just hold space for all throughout the process. So yeah, and I think just communicating and taking action where you can when it comes to getting into the schools that you want. And there is no notice as coaches, parents, and athletes, the desire and the really powerful, creative, magnificent, dynamic human brain that just constantly seeks certainty, and just notice it and then come back to that present moment, what you can control.
Sam, I think we could probably go like 2 hours on this stuff because it's so deep.
Yeah.
And it goes so far. And I've now taken 92 minutes of your time and I'm really appreciative of it. Yeah. Where can people connect with you, and how can people get connected to some of the work that you're doing?
So SamanthaLivingstone.com. And I really encourage, I am going to be, and with your permission, share this mental health first aid. I'm going to be hosting a training on August 26th and a few in September that I'm working out times for. And I would love to invite coaches, parents, organizational leaders to join me in there. So you can just go to the SamanthaLivingstone.com/connect and message me that you want in on that. And then I also have a website that I've shared with Mike. I don't know if you want to share that in the notes somewhere, where you can just go directly and sign up for information. But yeah, that there, or on social media, emailing me. Yeah, I'm available. I do have my boundaries when it comes to that, being responsive, but I will get back to you. I do read all the messages.
And Sam, I know that, we've had a lot of conversations, and you've been a huge help for helping me reframe the way that I look at certain things. I wanted to leave you with this thought today, and we can talk about it for a minute or two. I have a great assistant coach. He swam at a very high level in the 60s and 70s, and he just has a great way about him. When it comes to the uncertainty of what's happening, what are we getting ready for? That's what the kids want to know. What are we getting ready for? We don't have any meat.
Yeah.
He said the other day, our training is not about if, it's about when. And so that's created a whole new way for them to reframe some of this uncertainty and say, I'm going to accept the fact that I don't know when we're going to swim again.
Yes. Yep.
But I'm going to also keep some joy in that there is something coming. We just don't know when it's going to be.
Yeah, you're reminding me. So this morning in my meditation, I was talking about choosing hope. So it's a choice. It's a choice to choose. So in this moment, choosing to be hopeful, right? accepting. So you hit back, you're circling back to a lot of the things we talked about, accepting the not knowing instead of fighting it. When you fight it, you suffer. So it's a struggle to not know. And being in that space of not knowing. So you're saying, let's accept it. We don't know. We're not sure what it will look like. And also there's this next level of, I'm choosing hope. I'm choosing to be hopeful. I believe there's going to be something. And so that just elevates instantly, as you're saying, it elevates energy. It's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. That's it. Yeah. And we don't know what the path will look like. We anchor right here and trust that it's going to be there.
I'm getting texts from people. This mental health certification first aid needs to happen.
Yes. I would love your support as coaches. So here's, if I can share this. And I told you, I also warned you privately. Like, I don't know how much you want me to share, but I'm ready to share, because there needs to be pressure. And I think that, I think structurally we leave coaches hanging out to dry. We put you in a situation and it's like, I could go on a soapbox with that. So I would absolutely love coaches getting behind this. I would love parents getting behind this and putting the pressure on so that, maybe there is a portion that coaches pay or the club pays or whatever for the training. It's not, when I think of how many CEUs it's worth and all that stuff relative across the board, it's minimal. And also have subsidies, right? Like, this is something that has to happen within our USA swimming community. And I think what they said on the documentary, The Weight of Gold, is like, you are in Niagara swimming. There's been a loss of life. Like, how many athletes, how many humans do we have to lose before we start to take this conversation seriously? So yes. So please, I would love support. I would love help. I am welcoming of that. We go further together. Yeah.
Sam, thank you so much for your time today. There's so many great bullet points that I'm going to have in our show notes, and they'll be available on our website. And I'll also share it across all of our social media platforms. But we really appreciate your time. We appreciate your family's time.
Or peeking through the door.
I know that's always a good barometer for when you should wrap things up, right? So thanks so much, Sam. I really appreciate it. And we will definitely be in contact. And I look forward to talking and working with you more.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. We'll see you tomorrow on Fitter and Faster Insider with Jeremy Lin. And next week, we have Brendan Hansen on Thursday. So looking forward to those. And we'll see you next week, guys.